He was the Teutonic spirit in person. He flew the Swastika, the ancient Aryan symbol of good fortune. He was a modern Siegfried with a magic sword, and rose petals greeted his chariot as he rode in victory. Adolf Hitler, Emperor of Germany's Third Reich. But dust and ashes were his final portion in this life. The gods of Germany deserted him at the end, and death and destruction were his people's reward for following him. His only monument, the utter ruin of his country. The fall of France in June 1940 signaled Hitler's greatest triumph. In 6 weeks, the German armies had destroyed France as a military power. Even those generals who doubted Hitler's direction of the war were silenced by the astonishing success of his moves. The war had not lasted a year, but on the continent of Europe, German power was supreme. The German flag now flew in Paris in revenge for Germany's defeat in 1918. Nothing, it seemed, could halt Hitler's dream of conquest. Drew Middleton of the New York Times was a war correspondent and witnessed France's collapse.
And now we see Hitler as master of Europe. He has, however, at this time begun to show those traces of megalomania that make him unable to understand the forces now arrayed against him. He does not understand the strength of a united democracy in Britain. He fails to grasp the great industrial power of the United States. And finally, and perhaps most important, he does not understand the heroic patriotism of the Russian people.
Although Paris was in German hands, Hitler could not afford to rest. The momentum of his drive for world power required further victories. His real prize lay in the East. But meanwhile, the British must be made to sue for peace. I can see no reason why this war should continue, he declared in the Reichstag. At the same time, Hitler threatened the British with annihilation if they did not bend to his will. While he waited for peace moves which never came, his strategists prepared Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of England. First, British air power had to be eliminated. Hermann Göring's much vaunted Luftwaffe was given the task of bringing England to her knees. For 2 months during the summer of 1940, the fate of the free world hung in the balance. What came to be known as the Battle of Britain ended in the middle of September, when Hitler was forced to postpone his invasion plans, and with them, his timetable for the attack on Russia. Hitler never understood the British, nor the character of their new leader, Winston Churchill. His failure to subdue Britain in September 1940 was the turning point in his fortunes, though he did not realize it at the time.
He refused to learn from failure. He began to think, as men that have supreme power do, that he was infallible. And when he began to plan the attack on Russia, he again and again intervened in the planning, which was a thing best left to the technicians of war. So in the end, this man with this tremendous power is really a man playing with paper dolls.
The Luftwaffe was never able to replace the losses in trained pilots and aircraft that sustained in the Battle of Britain. But Hitler was still a conquering hero to most of his fellow countrymen. As yet, the German people had suffered hardly any ill effects of the war. They still followed their leader blindly, and he was blind to what had really happened in the skies above the small island across the English Channel.
He couldn't stop. Now that may have been events or it may have been the man, but the fact is he didn't. Now this may be part of a commander's equipment, that you can overlook the reverses. You keep going. Your power impels you to go from defeat to defeat to defeat, even though the defeat's ostensibly at the time of victories.
Hitler ruled continental Europe west of Russia. Where would he attack next? His agents were in all corners of the globe, disseminating Nazi propaganda and extending the influence of Germany. In France, the aged Marechal Pétain headed a puppet government. In Spain, General Franco, himself a dictator and ostensibly a supporter of Germany, proved less amenable to Hitler's will. Hitler wanted a free run to Gibraltar, but Franco played for time. He was more realistic in his appraisal of Germany's position. Late in 1940, Molotow, Russia's foreign minister, arrived in Berlin to confirm the year-old Nazi-Soviet pact. Outwardly, Nazis and Soviets were in peaceful accord with each other, but secretly Hitler was already preparing to strike east.
Well, I suppose that was Hitler's greatest diplomatic coup. It made his eastern frontier safe to the extent that he could go for the West, and indeed for Poland. Poland was divided by the Russians and the Germans, and from the German standpoint, they were then free to turn to the West. The pact endured until June 21st, 1941.
Molotow left Berlin with Hitler's promise that Germany would never attack Russia. Meanwhile, plans for Germany's invasion of Russia went steadily ahead. In June 1941, the assault began. The attack on Russia was given the code name Operation Barbarossa. Germany must have living space, he had written in Mein Kampf, and living space could only be found in the East. Take what you want by force. Might makes right. And Slavs, after all, were unworthy to stand in the way of the master race. Supremely confident in his superior military power, Hitler anticipated a short campaign in the East. The majority of his troops were not even issued winter clothing. To direct the campaign, Hitler moved his headquarters to a secret bunker in East Prussia called Wolf's Lair. He had secured his southern flank by adding Greece and Yugoslavia to his conquests. The states of Eastern Europe were already subservient to him. From Wolf's Lair, he could concentrate all Germany's resources on smashing the Soviet Union and wiping out Bolshevism forever. Hitler isolated himself at Wolf's Lair for the next 3.5 years. He could dream of conquests greater than Napoleon's or Alexander's. The adulation of his followers, the mass rallies of the past, all the rhetoric of the Nazi movement which had swept him to power was now concentrated in his person. one people, one Reich, one leader. As the momentum of attacks slowed down, Hitler increasingly intervened in the day-to-day conduct of the battle.
Now, the military saw this, a lack of continuous purpose and an ignorance of what makes a campaign go. Eisenhower used to say that any damn fool can be a strategist, but it takes somebody who knows armies to get the food, the ammunition, and the fuel there on time so that the attack goes through. And I believe Hitler didn't know that, and his generals knew he did.
But the realities of the battlefield on which Hitler had chosen to fight began to reveal the madness of his dreams. Then, in December 1941, Japan attacked America at Pearl Harbor. Hitler at once declared war on America, thereby committing Germany to what was now truly a world war.
Declaring war on the United States was folly. He may have thought that the destruction of the battle fleet at Pearl Harbor would keep the Americans busy. Again, he misunderstood the tremendous potential this country had for waging war. Hardly tapped.
On the Russian front, the war dragged on. The German armies were halted outside Moscow and Leningrad and could go no further. Hitler's top commanders advised withdrawal towards the German frontier, but he refused to consider any suggestion of retreat. The enormous casualties suffered by his forces left him unmoved, while the fate of the conquered races was of no importance to him. His own will, he believed, was enough to win the ultimate victory, a victory which would justify everything. Hitler continued to make strategic decisions against the professional advice of his generals. The turning point came at Stalingrad, where Hitler allowed an entire German army to be surrounded. Defying Hitler's orders, Field Marshal von Paulus, the German commander, surrendered. In a rage, Hitler began to suspect all his generals of treachery. He was determined to humiliate the once proud officer corps of the German army. On July 20th, 1944, a group of these officers attempted to assassinate Hitler by placing a bomb in his bunker. Hitler survived, badly shaken.
I believe that the officers didn't want to kill Hitler because they thought he was a megalomaniac or anti-Semitic. They wanted to kill him because they thought he was losing the war, as indeed he was.
Hitler ordered a terrible vengeance. He hunted down his enemies in the officer class with the same venomous intensity as he did the Jews. A Nazi propaganda film, apparently made during the war, pictured Jewish families enjoying themselves in special camps. What purpose this film was intended to serve is not clear. Hitler made no secret of his hatred of Jews, nor of his determination to rid Germany of them. In grim reality, Jews were sent to special camps only to be killed. From all parts of Europe under Nazi rule, Jews were herded together and dispatched to gas chambers. Systematic mass extermination was Hitler's final solution of what he termed the Jewish problem. Several millions died in this way, or as a result of barbarous medical experiments. The program for the mass extermination of the Jews gathered momentum at the very time when Germany was being pressed hardest by the war. Hitler's power was turning more and more into the power only to kill and destroy. As the last months of the war approached, Hitler retreated further and further into fantasy. closeted with his staff, he talked of secret weapons and brilliant strokes which would give him final victory over his many enemies. But in the East, the Russians were already on German soil. Hitler was fighting the war now with words only. A talk by the Führer over the radio would be as good as a victorious battle today, wrote Goebbels in March 1945. In the West, the British and Americans had broken through Germany's defenses and were making for the heart of Hitler's Reich. Hitler himself was now in Berlin, living with his mistress Eva Braun in a bunker below the chancellery. Old men and children were being pressed into military service to fill up the gaps in his army.
Dass dieses Volk dereinst wieder...
Puffy-faced from the drugs which kept him going and visibly deteriorating from the strain, Hitler still possessed a demonic energy which excited a devotion from those around him as in the heady days of the past.
Da muss der deutsche Junge der Zukunft schlank und rank sein, flink wie Windhunde, zäh wie Leder und hart wie Kruppstahl.
As the Allies closed in on Berlin, Hitler clung to the only power he was left with, the power to bring all of Germany down with him into death and destruction. By day and by night, city after city in Germany felt the terrible effects of Allied mass bombing raids. The road to revenge, once garlanded with roses, now led to utter ruin. Hitler had ordered total war, and this was the result. Even when the Russians entered Berlin, Hitler continued to believe a miracle would save him. Goebbels encouraged him by reminding him of episodes in the life of Frederick the Great. Other Nazi leaders kept their spirits up with predictions from astrology. April 29th, the Russians were driving towards Hitler's bunker. On April 30th, they were on the next street. At last, Hitler faced the reality of his own death. He had always lived in the knowledge that he had the power to take his own life, persuading himself that by doing so, he could maintain a hold over Germany's destiny. It is all finished, he said at the end. National Socialism is dead and will never rise again. Germany is lost. It actually was not quite ready, not quite strong enough for the mission I set out for the nation. The final act took place in the bunker underneath the chancellery. Hitler said goodbye to his staff. Eva Braun, whom he'd recently made his wife, took poison. Hitler shot himself. Their bodies and those of Goebbels and his family were burned. Hitler's pursuit of power was undisguised and brutal. World power or going under had been his only alternatives. Though he went under, can posterity ever forget the 10 years when his voice made the world tremble?
Nicht nachlassen, Vorstellungen. Volk und Erde, das sind die beiden Wurzeln, aus denen wir unsere Kraft ziehen wollen. Der kostbarste Besitz auf dieser Welt aber ist das eigene Volk. und für dieses Volk und dieses Volk wollen wir ringen und wollen wir kämpfen.
What did he indeed accomplish? The war ended with the Soviet Union, a great military power, with Eastern Europe filled with communist states, with the British Empire intact, and finally, with the United States rising to the position of world leadership. And with that, millions upon millions of dead. Germans, Russians, Italians, French, British, Americans. That was his legacy, a legacy of ruin. In the end, power not only destroyed Hitler, it destroyed the very basis from which he had exercised power.
In the ruins of Berlin, the survivors of Hitler's 1,000-year Reich began to look for a new way of life. A generation born in defeat would live to see a new Germany become rich and free and powerful again. Could it happen that anyone, in Germany or elsewhere, would ever again listen to another Hitler preaching a revolution of destruction